So good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Victoria Memorial Hall for the first event of this new year, 2019. So at the very outset, I would like to wish all of you a very, very happy new year and all the best for 2019. And we are gathered here for an illustrated lecture from the Legion of Honor to the Star of India, to be new 19th century emperors and their orders of chivalry, to be delivered by Helen Watanabe-O'Kelly, Professor of German Literature, University of Oxford, currently Fellow of Institute of Advanced Study in Paris. Before we go on with the lecture, may I request Dr. Jayanta Sengupta, Secretary and Curator of Victoria Memorial Hall, to welcome the audience, please, and introduce the speaker.
Good afternoon, everybody, and a very happy new year to all of you. And welcome to today's lecture by Professor Helen Watanabe-O'Kelly on From the Legion of Honor to the Star of India, New 19th Century Emperors and Their Orders of Chivalry. It's a privilege and honor to have Professor Watanabe-O'Kelly with us today, and we are deeply thankful to her for making time during her brief visit in Calcutta this week to give this talk. Professor Watanabe-O'Kelly is Professor of German Literature in the Faculty of Medieval and Modern Languages in the University of Oxford and Emeritus Fellow of Exeter College, Oxford, and currently a Fellow in the Institute of Advanced Study in Paris. She is also a Fellow of the British Academy. Her main research interests are in German literature and culture from the late 15th to the early 18th centuries within their European context, and also in women's writing in all periods and in the representation of women in German literature and culture. She has made a special study of early modern court festivals of all kinds throughout Europe and of court culture. She has written several books on the history, culture, and mentalities of Europe from the 16th century onwards, of which the most recent one is titled Beauty or Beast? The Woman Warrior in the German Imagination from the Renaissance to the Present, which was published in 2010 by Oxford University Press. In addition, she has edited several books, including the Cambridge History of German Literature, which was published back in 1997. She is the project leader of a project entitled Marrying Cultures, Queen's Consort and European Identities from 1500 to 1800, which is a project of the Humanities in the European Research Area as part of its program entitled Cultural Encounters. The project involves collaboration with colleagues in Germany, Poland, and Sweden. Professor Helen Watanabe-O'Kelly is currently working on a book for Oxford University Press, which is entitled Projecting Imperial Power, the New 19th Century Emperors and the Public Sphere. And alongside France, Austria, Germany, Brazil, and Mexico, British India is one of the territories she is looking at. And her lecture today, I assume, will dwell on several issues and questions that she proposes to raise in the book. For those of you who may not have seen the invitation card for the lecture, I will read out an abstract of the lecture today. The 19th century saw the creation of new emperors in France, Austria, Germany, Mexico, Brazil, and India. Each of these emperors, from Napoleon Bonaparte to Queen Victoria, instituted so-called orders of chivalry. These were distinctions involving medals, ribbons, and sashes, and rich costumes to be worn on formal occasions. Some of these decorations were awarded for merit of various kinds or for military bravery, and others to ensure the loyalty of the recipient. Queen Victoria founded such an order in 1861, namely the Star of India. The lecture asks what the point of these orders was in general, and whether the Star of India was used in the same way during the British Raj as such orders were used in other new empires. So that's all I have to say for now. Like all of you, I'm eagerly looking forward to listening to Professor Helen Watanabe-O'Kelly's lecture. So ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Professor Helen Watanabe-O'Kelly to give the lecture on From the Legion of Honor to the Star of India, New 19th Century Emperors and Their Orders of Chivalry. Professor Helen.
Before Professor O'Kelly takes over the microphone, may I request Jayanta Sengupta to kindly hand over a small memento on behalf of Victoria Memorial Hall to the speaker of this afternoon.
Not the Star of India.
Oh, thank you so much. Oh, how wonderful.
Right.
Oh, lots of reading. Oh, yes, marvelous.
And Dr. Jayanta Sengupta did mention about the beauty or the beast. The lecture, I'm sure, is going to be the beauty, and for this period, your mobile phone is going to be the beast. So if you could kindly ask your beast to shut up for this period of the lecture, that would be very useful. Thank you very much.
Well, first of all, let me say what an honor it is to be here at the Victoria Memorial Hall. I've been to Calcutta before, 10 years ago, but I've never been to this wonderful building. And it's one of the places I've come, especially from Oxford, to see. And I have come to India to learn about India from Indians. So there is an irony in that then Dr. Sengupta asked me, would I like to give a lecture to you? So I hope I will be telling you something that you don't know already. But we will see as the lecture goes on. Now I kind of feel I'm rather attacked by the microphone here. Sorry, I need to put my... and so am I doing the... Hang on a sec. Let me just make sure that I know how to move the PowerPoint. Oh, I can do like that, yes. Okay, we're all set. On the 1st of November, 1861, two related ceremonies took place simultaneously in London and in Allahabad. At the ceremony in London, Queen Victoria clothed three men in this long, light blue satin mantle lined with white silk, a mantle that covered the body right down to the ground. It was fastened, as you can see, with a white silk cord decorated with blue and silver tassels, and on the left side, over the heart, were embroidered the rays of the sun with the motto, "Heaven's light our guide," surrounding a star. Around the necks of these three men, she hung a gold collar, a kind of necklace, decorated with palm fronds and lotuses on either side of a crown. Hanging from the crown was a star, and from the star hung a portrait of the Queen herself, made, as you will see if you look at it closely, made to look rather Indian. I mean, it bears no resemblance to what Queen Victoria looked like. She's made to look like an Indian princess. There was also a badge, a kind of brooch like this. And the three men that she decorated on the 1st of November 1861 were her husband, Prince Albert, their son, the Prince of Wales, and Duleep Singh, the deposed and dispossessed Sikh prince who had been brought to England at the age of 8 and had been adopted by Queen Victoria. At the ceremony in Allahabad on the same day, the British Viceroy, Lord Canning, clothed the Maharajas of Gwalior, of Indore and Patiala, and of Kashmir. And he also clothed the Begum of Bhopal in the same long, pale blue mantle, and he hung the collar with its star and portrait of Queen Victoria around their necks. The Nizam of Hyderabad, the Gaikwad of Baroda, and the Nawab of Rampur were also entitled to receive these British gifts, but chose to do so in their own territories. So what did these two ceremonies mean? What they were doing was inaugurating a new order of knighthood or order of chivalry, known as the most exalted order of the Star of India. Orders of chivalry or orders of knighthood were founded originally in the European Middle Ages and were societies of knights, that is, mounted soldiers who had the specifically Christian task of reclaiming the holy sites in the Middle East from the Turks. As the orders of chivalry developed from the 15th century on, they became exclusive aristocratic societies, membership of which was a distinction given by a monarch and only available to high-born persons. Kings and queens used membership of these orders of knighthood both to reward the loyalty and bravery of those who had fought for their cause, to mark out those who were close to them in some way, and to bind key persons in their territory or in their entourage closer to them. So there's an element of reward, but an element also of binding the people to you. All European kingdoms had such ancient orders of chivalry. An example in Britain is the Order of the Garter, founded in 1348 and still in existence. So you can see the second Duke of Newcastle from the 18th century, and look at the garter, the thing bound around below his knee. The modern Knights of the Garter, they also get an actual garter, which they sort of wear over their trouser leg, I think. So this is the Order of the Garter, and it's still in existence. And apart from the monarch, that's Queen Elizabeth II, and the Prince of Wales, there can only be 24 other living members, so it's very exclusive. As a sign that a knight belonged to an order of chivalry, he was always given a medal to wear, in the most impressive versions hanging from a gold collar, like you see here. Sometimes he was given a sash or a ribbon, and often a rich cloak or other costume to be worn on formal occasions. And it wasn't just a simple matter of becoming a member of an order of chivalry. Oh, no. There were ranks, different classes. So you could be in the top rank and the next rank and the middle rank. Sometimes there were 5 different ranks, and you got a different medal and a different sash and so on. And the higher up somebody went in an order of chivalry, for example in Britain, the more likely he was to be allowed to put a title such as Sir before his name. Now, as soon as Victoria became Queen of India in 1858, after the Great Rebellion of 1857, the then British Prime Minister, Lord Palmerston, suggested to her that an Indian order of knighthood be established as a means of rewarding and strengthening the personal bonds of loyalty between Queen Victoria and the loyal Indian princes. Note the focus on the princes. When Queen Victoria became Queen of India, her proclamation on the 1st of November 1858 was addressed to the princes, chiefs, and people of India. So the princes are first. As you all know better than I do, Victoria ruled over 2/3 of India directly, but the other third was governed by some 500 princely states. And in the historian David Canadine's words, I quote, these Rajas and Maharajas, Nawabs and Nizams, after 1857, were no longer reviled as alien and corrupt by the British, but acclaimed as familiar and traditional. Victoria's proclamation as Queen announced that we shall respect the rights, dignity and honour of native princes as our own. The British saw in these princes the equivalent of the great landowners in Britain, the dukes and marquises and earls who had inherited their titles and lands and wealth down the centuries and helped to govern the country by sitting in the British House of Lords and sometimes holding ministerial positions. The Indian princes were not given any such role in the wider government of India, but were supposed to keep order within their own territories, and they were also supposed to collect taxes. So, the minute she becomes Queen of India, they say, we need an order of chivalry, but nothing happens for 18 months. The Queen did not forget about this, and she recommended the idea to Lord Canning, the first Viceroy, whereupon another 9 months passed without any progress being made. It took until 1861 to found the order under the title we've heard already, the Most Exalted Order of the Star of India. Now, the first idea was to award membership of the order only to Indians, but it was soon realized that there would be no value for an Indian prince in joining an order that did not include any British, any Europeans. The next problem was what to call the new order. As Miles Taylor relates in his recent book on Queen Victoria and India, Prince Albert, Queen Victoria's husband, energetically promoted the project. And he suggested that the order should be called the Order of the Eastern or Morning Star. He explained to Sir Charles Wood, the Secretary of State for India, that, and you have the quotes here, the Eastern Star preceded the three kings or wise men when they did homage to the infant Christ, and may be taken as the emblem of dawning Christianity. As such, it would have a memorable meaning which may remain concealed from the Indians, and yet one day be recognized in history. Albert is here proposing that this order of knighthood, specifically created for India, should have a hidden Christian message. He also pointed out that, and this is another quote from Albert, the light of the world came from the east like the sun, and the human races are supposed to have spread from the east, so the emblem might be eligible on that account and not uncomplimentary to the Indian. He then set about drafting a list of Latin mottos for the order. His final choice was Lux Caeli Dux Noster, Heaven's Light Our Guide. So you see here completely unthinking and Eurocentric way of looking at things. Fortunately, Sir Charles Wood, the Secretary of State for India, and Lord Canning, the Viceroy, between them pointed out to Prince Albert that, for an Indian, India is not in the East. I mean, it's not, is it? You aren't in the East. India, if it's anywhere for an Indian, it's possibly in the West. But the idea that you're going to call the order the Star of the East is completely Eurocentric. And they also said to Prince Albert that, and this is a quote from Sir Charles Wood, he said, for princes whose ancestors were sitting on their thrones 4 or 5 centuries before the Order of the Garter was founded, Latin was not suitable. So he has a much better appreciation of what we would nowadays call global history. Lord Canning also said firmly to Albert that Indians do not think of themselves as Orientals, which was Albert's thought. So many other names for the order were proposed that Albert, exasperated, said it should be called the Golden Impossibility, since agreement seemed impossible. Eventually, the order was called the Star of India, and this is how it was announced. So the Queen, being desirous of affording to the princes, chiefs, and people of the Indian Empire a public and signal testimony of her regard by the institution of an order of knighthood, whereby her resolution to take upon herself the government of the territories in India may be commemorated, and by which her Majesty may be enabled to reward conspicuous merit and loyalty, etc., etc., etc. She's founding the new order, and it's going to be called, we finally have the name, the Most Exalted Order of the Star of India. Now, apart from the Queen and the Viceroy, who was always to be Grand Master of the Order, there were originally also to be only 24 knights. However, in 1866, 5 years later, the order was extended and divided into 3 ranks or classes. So you had a top rank consisting of 25 persons, and they were all to be called Knight Grand Commanders of the Star of India, and were entitled to put the letters KGCSI after their names, and then there were 90 in the second rank, and then there could be 100 in the third. So you now have about, you've got kind of 250 people. When the Star of India was created in 1861, it was primarily used to reward those Indian princes who had been loyal to Britain during the rebellion and its aftermath. So the first Indian recipients were 5 Hindu princes, the Maharajas of Gwalior, Kashmir, Indore and Patiala, and the Gaikwar of Baroda, and 3 Muslim rulers, the Nizam of Hyderabad, the Begum of Bhopal, we saw her earlier, and the Nawab of Rampur. Now, to the British mind, to receive membership in the Order of the Star of India was a great honour that the Indian princes should be grateful to receive. Again, however, this Eurocentric viewpoint made something that was actually quite complex appear simple. Anthropologists tell us that in many cultures, to accept clothing from someone who is claiming superior authority means acceptance of that authority. In Europe in the 16th and 17th centuries, and still today where there are kings and queens, the followers or servants of a priest, or of a prince, not a priest, a prince, or a high aristocrat, will wear what is called his livery. So it's a kind of uniform. It's in a certain colour, and it visibly demonstrates, I belong to that prince. So therefore, if you are giving something like the mantle of the Star of India to an Indian prince, if they accept it, to their mind, they're now accepting the authority of the British Queen. Bernard Cohn points to the tradition of a Muslim ruler accepting nazar from a subordinate gold coins and presenting him with a kilot, a robe or set of clothes in return. Accepting clothing meant accepting the authority of the giver and confirming the recipient's subordinate position. The Nizam of Hyderabad, therefore, declined to be honoured with a knighthood and membership of the Star of India. Lord Canning was extremely annoyed. You know, how do you mean you're not accepting this honour? He said he couldn't accept it because he was being asked to wear the mantle and the jewelled insignia. Through his Prime Minister, Salar Jung, he pointed out to Lord Canning that, and I quote, the people of this country have a particular antipathy to wearing costumes different from their own. And if the robe were made out of velvet or silk, it would be in contravention of Muslim law, nor could he wear a pendant with a portrait of the Queen or with the likeness of any created being. So the Nizam of Hyderabad did not go to Allahabad to be invested with the order, but stayed at home. In fact, when the patent, the official document making him a knight of the order, arrived in Hyderabad with the cloak and the insignia, he made proper reverence to these objects, we're told, but he did not put on the cloak. So he said, thank you very much, and probably put it in a cupboard. Another problem arose because the recipients of, see, look, he's wearing the mantle of the Star of India. He looks most splendid in it. Another problem arose because the recipients of a knighthood had to sign a document. The British asked them to sign a document promising that the cloak would be returned to the British when the recipient died. The point here from the British point of view was that the knighthood was not hereditary. So you were given membership of the order and you became Sir so-and-so, so-and-so, but your son did not have the right to call himself Sir so-and-so, so-and-so, so you had to give the cloak back. But giving a ceremonial garment like this and then insisting on having, I need a strong man, can't open that, giving somebody a cloak and then, thank you very much, and then asking to have it back again, I mean, this was seen as a very strange and insulting action. So a lesser problem This is the second Begum to be given the order. A lesser problem was a refusal by the Begum of Bhopal, the only who was her predecessor, who was the only woman to receive the star in the first round. They refused to be called Lady Knights, which indeed is an absolutely ridiculous title. They said, you know, we are monarchs, and so we're knights, just like anybody else. 20 years later. We should take their coat off them, just like the British were doing when they were giving the mantle. We take it away again. 20 years later, when Victoria was proclaimed Empress of India in 1878, she instituted 2 more orders of chivalry. The first was the most eminent Order of the Indian Empire, divided in 1887 into 3 ranks of Knight, Grand Commander, Knight Commander, and Companion. And here we see the Maharaja of Gondal in a 1911 photograph during his visit to London for the coronation of George V, wearing the mantle, collar and star of a Knight Grand Commander of the Order of the Indian Empire. And the names GCSI after his name mean that he already had the Star of India. So he's already a Grand Commander of the Star of India. Now he gets the Order of the Indian Empire. So he's a Sir twice over. And here you have, I mean, I had to show a picture of Lord Curzon as we're here in the Victoria Memorial Hall. This is Lord Curzon, looking just as nasty as I think he was in real life. I mean, he's got a nasty face, look. But he is wearing the mantle, the dark blue mantle of a Knight Grand Commander of the Order of the Indian Empire. Again, it has a star on the left shoulder. And the collar, also only worn by Knights Grand Commanders, was made of gold and composed of alternating golden elephants, Indian roses, and peacocks. In 1878, Queen Victoria also instituted an order specifically for women, the Imperial Order of the Crown of India. And here you see it being worn. Now, the whole point is that similar, equally elaborate decorations already existed in Britain. They had different names, but they had just as many subgroups and medals. The new Indian decorations were to reward the high British officials ruling India, the so-called proconsular elite, but also the Indian princely elite. They and their respective civil servants were all to be tied into the same system and ranked. An important prince could expect to be made a Knight Grand Commander of the Order of the Star of India or of the Indian Empire, just as his father and grandfather had been, and just as British viceroys and governors were. And then their wives of the viceroys and governors and of the princes were included in the Order of the Crown of India for women. I mean, here's an example. Lord Hardinge, the viceroy, and you can see that he's absolutely covered in different medals. I mean, he's got, I can see 5 of them on the photograph, and his wife is wearing 2 or 3. I mean, the historian David Cannadine says some of these people were like walking Christmas trees. You know, they had sort of decorations all over them. You'll see some photographs in a moment. So Lord Hardinge was the viceroy at the time, as you know, of the 1911 Delhi Durbar. And so, of course, therefore, he was the recipient of extra honours. Career civil servants could expect to be given a decoration once they had reached a certain rank in the civil service or in the army. And you will be glad to know that the present British High Commissioner in Delhi, Sir Dominic Asquith, has the letters KCMG after his name, indicating, you see, this is because of his rank. He's very important in the British system if he's High Commissioner in India. And so he's been made a Knight Commander of the Order of St. Michael and St. George. 100 years ago, he would have been a Knight Commander of the Order of the Star of India, and he would also have got the same decoration of the Indian Empire. So 2 elite groups of British officials and of British and Indians were entitled and were expected to wear the mantle and collar of one of the Indian orders on formal occasions. And of course, they all recognized each other's decorations and knew how high up in the rank they had got. So here we see George V awarding the Order of the Star of India to Ganga Singh Maharaja of Bikaner at the Delhi Durbar of 1911. And if you look at the picture, look at how many people there are wearing the pale blue mantle. There are several in the audience, and there are several of the British officials helping the king, and they're all wearing the pale blue mantle of the Star of India as well. So there are 2 Indian princes, at least, in the audience, and several other British officials. The Star of India continued to be awarded up to 1948, when it fell, for obvious reasons, into abeyance. The last surviving knight of the order, this is actually his father. It was this man's son. Look, you see, he's wearing, you can see the Star of India, the Indian Empire. His son, the Maharaja of Alwar, he only died in the year 2009. So now that order really has, those orders really have died out. They really are extinct. Now, you might think, and I might think, that the award of the same orders to British and Indian grandees made for equality between them, but nothing could be further from the truth. As I said earlier, the British ruled 1/3 of the territory of India through local rulers, but it was the British who decided which rulers qualified. Of course, it was clear that a ruler as grand as the Maharaja of Mysore or the Nizam of Hyderabad should be recognized and treated with as much respect as a European king. But there was a problem about how many of the lesser princes should be recognized. The Indian princes and their titles are listed in a wonderful book with the title The Golden Book of India, a genealogical and biographical dictionary of the ruling princes, chiefs, nobles, and other personages. I mean, this is just a page at random. It was compiled by Sir Roper Lethbridge and published in 2 editions in 1893 and 1900. In his preface, Lethbridge makes clear that it is the British government which decides whether a title, no matter how ancient, can be recognised or not. Sir Roper says, Indian titles are officially defined to be either by grant from government, that is, a new creation by Her Imperial Majesty, the Queen Empress through her representative, or by descent or well-established usage. The government, this is the British government, alone can be the judge of the validity of claims and of their relative strength in the case of titles acquired by descent or by well-established usage. Because Lethbridge says there is no central authority, in Britain there was a College of Arms that could decide all these things. In India there's no central office who can decide which Indian titles can be recognised, and he gives an example. He says it gives rise to great injustice. For instance, in the lower provinces of Bengal alone, there are at this moment some hundreds of families possessing, and not uncommonly using, titles derived from extinct dynasties or from common repute, yet not hitherto formally recognised by the British government. These, sometimes justly, but more frequently unjustly, are in this way placed in a false and invidious position. So you have all these princes that Queen Victoria is ruling through, and subsequently George V, but it's Britain who decides whether they're princes or not. Lethbridge simply lists all the Indian rulers in alphabetical order, but there was a strict order of precedence, jealously enforced by the Indian princes themselves. One of the ways that precedence among the princes was made not so much visible as audible was when a number of guns were fired by the British to salute a particular prince. So of the 500 princes just mentioned, only 103 ruled over so-called salute states. And a salute state was a state whose ruler was given a gun salute when they met with the viceroy or whoever it was at a durbar. and the number of guns fired in the salute denoted the importance and rank of that territory. The 5 most important territories, Hyderabad, Gwalior, Mysore, Kashmir and Baroda, were accorded 21 guns. The president of India gets 21 guns when he meets with a foreign, the head of a foreign state. So 21 guns was the top. Other states were given 19 guns, 17 guns, 15 guns, 13 guns, 11 guns, and 9 guns. Cochin was a 17-gun state. And you have to imagine that the particular prince, dressed up in all his finery and everything, he's counting in his head. Have I actually got 17 guns or not? Because if he was supposed to get 17 guns and only got 16, they'd be hell to pay. The empress, or emperor by contrast, was given the so-called Imperial salute of 101 guns, and the queen the royal salute of 31 guns. Now, again, to quote the historian David Cannadine, his point in his book Orientalism, How the British Saw Their Empire, is that the British came to India, as to other colonies, and conquered territories. And I come from a little conquered territory called Ireland. They came to these conquered territories bringing with them the rigidly hierarchical concept of society that they knew from home, and they applied it to India. Their partial understanding of the caste system made them think, says Cannadine, that it mirrored the stratified society they were accustomed to in Britain. You have only to read the heated debates about extension of the franchise, the reform bills of 1832 and 1867 in the British Parliament, trying to decide who should be allowed to vote in Britain. And you see how incredibly stratified Britain was, and how the vast mass of people were uneducated, even illiterate, and nobody thought that they could possibly vote because they wouldn't know how to vote. And so this ranking of different classes was something that the British brought to India. The system of honours and decorations, graded as we saw, was a way to distinguish further the upper levels of this stratified society and make these princes and nobles compete in their loyalty and service to the crown. No matter how friendly Queen Victoria was to Indian princes when they came to visit her in her house at Osborne on the Isle of Wight or in Windsor Castle, and she always welcomed them, provided, of course, that they remained exotic exhibits by wearing their most colourful Indian dress. Indians were not allowed to rule India, take any senior positions in the Indian civil service until, the India Act of 1919, too little too late. Nor, no matter how qualified, might they act as judges over Europeans in the courts until the passing of the so-called Ilbert Bill of 1884 during Lord Ripon's viceroyalty. Honours, too, were a means of exerting control. We see this in the outraged reaction to the Gaikwar of Baroda, who appeared at the 1911 Durbar before George V and Queen Mary, not wearing, as was expected, the ceremonial dress of the Star of India. He wore a simple, white coat. He carried a walking stick. He marched up, King Emperor, bowed, turned his back, walked off back, swinging his stick. And this was regarded as an absolutely appalling act. He was accused in the English language press in India and in England of a calculated insult, which was even considered to be seditious. And of course, 1911, there were newsreels. There's film. You can go onto YouTube and you can see them. And it illustrated the difference between his, bow to the king, and the low obeisances of the other princes. And they also showed his simple dress. He was not wearing, the Order of the Indian Empire or the mantle of the Star of India. So giving somebody an honour and a costume is a means of controlling them. You then expect them to wear it on the occasions when you have told them that they will wear it. The Indian princes, so important to the British rulers, were finally given a forum in which to articulate their views collectively when the Chamber of Princes was established in 1920 after the aforementioned Government of India Act was given royal assent. The Chamber of Princes first met on the 8th of February 1921 and initially consisted of only 120 members. Of the 120 members, 108 represented the more significant states and were members in their own right, while the remaining 12 seats represented a further 127 states. That left 327 unrepresented. Some rulers refused to join, Baroda, Gwalior, Holkar. So again, awarding such a forum to the Indian princes, rather like the Order of the Star of India or the Order of the British Empire, looks on the surface like an act of respect and recognition, but in fact it's an act of condescension. Now here I'd like to, here's the Chamber of Princes, and you can see how many of them are wearing their star. Yeah, there's quite a number if you look closely at the photograph. So here I'd like to draw back from India for a moment and put what I've been saying into a wider context. I'm sorry to keep coughing, but I contracted a cold in Delhi. Delhi was very cold, and I've got a cold. So I have to cough every now and again. So if I can draw back for a second and not show you any pictures, I came to think about the Order of the Star of India because I'm working at the moment, as Dr. Sengupta said, on a project looking at how the new emperors of the 19th century projected their power. And again, as he said, there were at various times during the 19th century new emperors in France, Austria, Germany, Brazil, Mexico, and of course in India. What interests me is that all of these rulers who from 1804 to 1952, who called themselves emperors, what interests me is how they created and sustained a panoply of power to project themselves as emperors. They all had to establish an imperial court with all kinds of gorgeously dressed court officials. They had to invent an imperial tradition or draw on an existing one. They had to create imperial spaces, architecture, city streets, squares. They had to create images and statues and organize splendid ceremonies and festivals. So I'm asking, how did all this, how is it constituted? How did it evolve? How did it enable the emperors to perform their imperial role? How did they project their majesty to the people they were governing? And at the same time, how did they project it to the wider world? The 19th century was a period of huge expansion in the public sphere and of the development of all kinds of media, not just print media, but photography and film. So again, I'm asking, how did these emperors use these media? So you can see how all these questions are very pertinent to India during the British Raj. But focusing our attention once more on the system of orders of chivalry as a mechanism with which to compare the various empires, let us just look very briefly at the different empires in turn. The Austrian Empire had arisen out of the Holy Roman Empire, which was in existence since the year 800 Common Era. The last Holy Roman Emperor, Franz II, was the elected overlord of a huge European territory of the German-speaking world. But thanks to Napoleon, he had to bring the Holy Roman Empire to an end after 1,000 years in 1806. Seeing what was coming, that the Holy Roman Empire would have to come to an end, 2 years before, in 1804, he had already created himself the hereditary Emperor of Austria. So Franz II then becomes Franz I, very confusing. Of course, Austria, I have to say, if anything, was even more obsessed with titles and honours than Britain. They already had the ancient order of the Golden Fleece, which is, a medieval order of chivalry. And this is Franz wearing the gorgeous costume of a knight of the Golden Fleece, and he's got the Golden Fleece. Can you see a thing like a gold sheep hanging from the collar around his neck? That's the Golden Fleece. So they already had this ancient order, but that wasn't enough. He then created another one, which was the Imperial Austrian Order of Leopold. So this is his first imperial order as Emperor of Austria. He called it after his father. And until they reformed this order in 1884, they again had all these different ranks, and each rank entitled you to a different role at the Austrian court. Some of them became privy councillors, some of them were made barons automatically, and it was always a hereditary dignity and so on. So it was an extremely evolved system. Very different is the order awarded by the German emperors. Now, they came into existence in 1871, Common Era. This is the Order of the Iron Cross. And of course, they're obviously trying to make themselves look different from the Austrians, among other things. Yeah? The Austrians all gold and, hanging sheep and whatnot. And this is iron and so on. It's based on the order created by the Prussian king Friedrich Wilhelm II in 1813 to reward bravery on the battlefield against Napoleon's army. And it was open to all soldiers, not just noblemen, not just officers. And it was first instituted in 1813 in 3 classes, and then it was revived again when when Wilhelm I became the first German emperor. And it is actually made of iron in a silver setting and is supposed to show Prussian duty, toughness and restraint rather than luxury. Here's another example, the emperors of Brazil. Now, they reigned from 1826 to 1890, but Pedro I, the first emperor, who had come originally from Portugal to Brazil, he founded 2 orders. The first, the Imperial Order of Dom Pedro I, and the second, the Imperial Order of the Rose, to commemorate his second marriage to Amelia of Leuchtenburg in 1829. And again, it was always given to reward loyalty. It's actually a very attractive order with those little roses. And here we see Pedro II of Brazil. He's wearing his cape of toucan feathers, but over it, you practically can't see it, but he is wearing the Order of the Rose. There only ever were 2 emperors of Brazil, Pedro I, Pedro II. Mexico had 2 very different short-lived emperors, partly because the Mexicans shoot their emperors. The native Mexican army commander, Agustín de Iturbide, who was in power from 1822 to 3, and then the Austrian prince, Maximilian of Austria, who reigned from 1860 to 1863. And he, of course, he was a Habsburg, he had come from Austria. He was extremely keen on ceremonial of all kinds. He reigned for such a short time, but he spent a lot of his time designing uniforms and helmets and, all sorts of things like that. So he, like Agustín, they reigned for a very brief period, but they went to great lengths to show that they were emperors. And it's therefore not surprising that they both invented, what did they invent? Orders of knighthood. Agustín I created the National Order of Guadalupe in 1821. And when Maximilian arrived in Mexico in 1860, he converted this into the Imperial Order of Guadalupe, and he created 2 new orders of his own, the Imperial Order of the Mexican Eagle, and for women, the Imperial Order of St. Charles. Now, to finish up, we're finally going to get to the man that you might have expected me to mention first, Napoleon. In 1802, at the age of 32, this army commander had been elected first consul of France. So he isn't an emperor at all yet. He's first consul of France. 4 years later, he had himself elected emperor of the French. The French had deposed and executed their king and queen, Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette, had got rid of the aristocracy and the court, and had therefore also swept away orders of chivalry, which of course they had had under their royal system. Napoleon proposed at first not an order of chivalry or knighthood, but an order of merit. And he had to convince his colleagues in the then government on the Council of State that this would be instituted. He said he wanted some way to acknowledge achievement of all kinds, mostly bravery on the battlefield or military service, but he also wanted to mark learning, artistic achievement and service to the state. He wanted it, and he's actually wearing the Legion of Honor here. He wanted it to be open to all in the spirit of equality of the French Revolution, and therefore he called it the Legion of Honor. This was kind of a Roman idea. Now, he had great difficulty getting this accepted by the government of the time. The legislation was only really barely passed by quite a small majority, but it was from the beginning divided into five classes. Now, in the Council of State, Napoleon was opposed in particular by a man called Councillor Berlier, who said that these things are baubles or toys. Medals are baubles. The French word is ochet for the people who know French here. He said, these are just, why do we want to have a Legion of Honor? These are just baubles and ribbons, and they should be reserved for monarchies, for kings. They are unworthy of a republic such as France had become. And Napoleon replied, the Romans had patricians, knights, citizens and slaves. For each thing they had a different costume, different customs. They observed all sorts of distinctions. And then this is the sort of, these are the killer sentences. I challenged anyone to show me an ancient or modern republic which has not had distinctions. These are called baubles. Well, it's by means of baubles that people are led. Napoleon was a great cynic, but he also had great insight into people's vanity, I think. After he became emperor in 1806, he then made the Legion of Honor much more royal in nature by instituting a grand decoration, the so-called Great Eagle, the Grand Aigle. And he also then instituted these kinds of ceremonies where he made it, such an honor to be given one of these decorations. So he's moved it all back to much more of a kind of royal decoration again. Yes, it's an order of merit, but it's now become something much more like an order of knighthood on the royal pattern. And the Legion of Honor, of course, still exists and is France's highest award today. So I just want to finish with two photographs that I think speak volumes. Oh, sorry. This is Napoleon. Of course, he's wearing the Legion of Honor around his neck. This is the man who started as an undistinguished army officer. He becomes an emperor, and he has these coronation robes, and he's wearing this round his neck. So, my second last picture. This is Alfonso XIII, King of Spain. This is all happening in 1905, so it's not that long ago in a way. Alfonso XIII, King of Spain, with his cousin, the future King George V. And Alfonso made a state visit to the United Kingdom in 1905, and it was thought polite on such occasions to wear the uniform and decorations of each other's country. So they are both wearing British decorations and Spanish decorations, which is giving you this Christmas tree effect. Alfonso is wearing the uniform of a general of the British Army. He's wearing the Royal Victorian chain, the sash and star of the Garter, British decorations. Then he's wearing his Spanish ones, the Order of Charles III, the neck badge of the Golden Fleece, and the badge of the 4 Spanish military orders. And George is wearing a Spanish uniform, and he's wearing the Golden Fleece, the Order of Charles III, etc., the Garter, the Order of St. Michael and St. George. At roughly the same time, here is Sir Bupinder Singh, the Maharaja of Patiala. Now, he was a remarkable, you probably all know about him. He was a remarkable man by any standards. He was decorated for his bravery during World War I, in which he served the British in France, Belgium, Italy, and Palestine. He was made an honorary Major General. He was the Chancellor of the Chamber of Princes for a number of years during the 1920s. He represented India at the League of Nations. He took part in the Round Table conferences in 1830 to 32, when the political future of India was being discussed. He was, in addition, a first-class cricketer, and he was a notable ladies' man. Now, someone like this is so distinguished that you would think he wouldn't need any medals. Everybody must know who he is, internationally even. But in fact, he collected them. And by the end of his life, he had 23 different medals, including, of course, as when he's wearing them here, the Star of India and the Order of the Indian Empire. He had the French Legion of Honor. He had decorations from all the kings of Europe. And he loved to have himself painted and photographed wearing them. I mean, here he's only wearing a small fraction of the number of medals that he was actually entitled to wear. Once you introduce a system of distinctions and ranks, then of course it becomes a matter of embarrassment to a distinguished man if he does not have these decorations, especially if princes of a similar rank do have them. So of course you can play princes off against each other by giving, by how you're handing out the decorations, just as politicians in Britain still do. And notable people in Britain competed for medals and honours. So did Austrian aristocrats, German army officers, and Indian princes. If you have a system of decorations, you also play to people's vanity, and you can manipulate them by means of these decorations. So looking back on all that I've said about honours and orders and medals, you will have to decide whether you think that Napoleon was right, and that in a monarchical system, such as obtained in Britain and its colonies, men and women could be led by baubles, by toys. I leave that up to you to decide. Thank you very much indeed.
Sure. So that was the first question. Second question is, we also had other European colonial powers which had monarchy, like France, Portugal, Netherlands, or Germany for that matter. Were they also creating separate chivalric orders for their chiefs in their colonies, like the French in Algeria or Tunisia or in Caribbean? And the third is more a kind of a sarcasm of our times. What do you think is the bauble driving the most powerful republic of today? And you know whom I'm implying.
Yes, I know. I can stand here as well. I'm not sure, is this actually better? Can you hear me? You can probably hear me better there, I think. I don't have to hold anything. Yeah, well, thank you very much for that, for the thing about the settler colonies. I mean, I'm restricting myself, because I have to restrict myself, to emperors and to a territory which is being directly ruled by an emperor, because it's that enables me to sort of compare different systems. So that's the first point there, but thank you very much for the Dominic Leaven comparison, because of course there's been criticism of, David Canada, and there's been a lot of discussion and people saying, this is all too simple and too neat, and, of course you can disagree, you can disagree with anything, particularly with his analysis of Britain at the period, where he's saying you have this stratified society and you apply it to India, but nonetheless, I don't think we can rule it out completely. So that was that one. And the third point you made about the French or the Portuguese or whatever, not as far as I know that they were actually creating orders here in India, but it's certainly something worth checking out, but not as far as I know. Or in their colonies generally. I mean, I think if you in the French system, if you had risen up sufficiently high, then I don't see why you wouldn't get, the Order of Merit. But it's an interesting thing for me to check how many colonial sort of who are thought to be loyal in the French colonies. How many of them were awarded the Legion of Honor? Yeah, but what's so interesting about the British Raj in India is creating orders just for India to be given to those British who are in India and Indians. They're not bringing this back to Britain at all, and that's what interests me about it. And then the whole discussion about how you structure it and so on. But thank you very much. Those are very helpful points for me to think about. Thank you.
I'm coming to this as someone who works on
Yes.
and I was very curious about your thoughts about...
Oh, yeah.
Can everyone hear me now? Is this better? Only. Okay, I'll try and project.
Hello.
So Hello. Okay, so
I think you've got to hold it.
I'm going to hold it like a pop star.
I think, yeah.
So I was curious about your thoughts about the politics of jewelry and masculinity.
Oh, yes.
Because one of the things about the orders, especially for the India side,
Yeah.
you're showing us the Maharaja Patiala here,
Yeah.
famous for his Patiala necklace.
Oh, yes,
right?
that's fabulous. Mhm.
So the order actually in India, more so than anywhere else, kind of straddles this interesting world of jewelry and the male body.
Yes.
And I ask this because you started with Winter Halter's portrait
Yeah.
of Dilip Singh.
Yes. Yeah.
And the painted portrait of Victoria that's
Yeah,
around his
yeah.
neck
Yeah.
was famously gifted to him. And Natasha Eaton has actually compared it with a slave collar almost.
Oh, yes.
Which is a very
Oh, dear,
interesting
yes.
comparison.
Praise
But
God.
Dilip Singh's father, Ranjit
Yes.
Singh, would famously start giving the British, especially Lord Auckland when he was visiting him
Yeah.
during camp, portraits of himself because he very quickly realized how miserly the East India Company was because the expectation was jewels
Of course.
in exchange
Yes.
for Victoria's miniature portrait. And of course we know the value between these two is vastly different.
Yeah.
So one question for you, so this is kind of a comment, but the
Yeah,
question for you is, especially with jewelry and masculinity, is that when the Star of India, or any of these orders is actually is awarded, the expectation is that jewels will come back to the royal family. And this was kind of a golden rule of understanding. So Kuch Bihar, for instance,
Yes.
because they didn't have the number of gun salutes as Baroda did, actually lavished jewels on Queen Victoria.
Yeah.
So any
Yeah.
thoughts about these kind of, the subtext
Oh,
underneath
yes.
this is very
Oh,
much
yes.
wrapped around
Oh, yes.
gems and jewels and the body. And,
Yes. Yes.
and it's an interesting counterpoint to the militaristic gun salute, which proclaims a particular type
Yes,
of
it
masculinity. But with the Indian princes, they were also seen as effeminate because of the way they presented themselves, right?
Yes.
And jewelry plays a very key
Yeah.
role in defining the body as such. So if you could talk a little bit
Yes,
about the trainings,
exactly.
I'd be
Yes, and of course we all know the history of the Koh-i-Noor diamond, which when Victoria got her hands on it, she was not going to give that back again, ever again. And of course it's kind of wryly comic in a way, this complete imbalance between the sort of gifts that were given, sometimes the East India Company officials, or indeed later on, were giving gifts as though they were going to some sort of savage tribe in the bush, and they're coming to have a durbar with some, prince who has a sophistication in his costumes and in his palace and in the way he's living, and is handing over. Yeah, he's certainly handing over jewels. I mean, I think that there was definitely. I mean, I think that's is a known point that the British were very very keen to get valuable gifts back, but then they had a whole series of rules about what you could accept and whether you could re-gift things. That you would get a gift, but you could pass it on, which again I think from an Indian point of view would be a very insulting thing to do. But so there's, I mean, it's one of the things Bernard Cohn writes about that, all of that. I think the whole business about the masculine body is fascinating. Have you published on it? Have you? Would you give me the reference afterwards? I'd be very happy to, because of course from a European point of view, while all their rulers are also draped in jewels, nonetheless something like the Patiala necklace or all those ropes of pearls are seen as, this is kind of women's, there's a sort of a gender thing. It's seen as women's jewellery, whereas of course in India it isn't. But so I'd be very glad to read. Please, if you'd pass me on the reference, I'd be most grateful. And please, any more references from anybody, please bring them this way.
Thank you so much, Helen.
Add something, please. Going back to the question about other colonial powers.
Yes.
The Third Empire did create a France de Château.
Yeah.
But it was a French family that was given the title.
Mm-hmm.
Whether it ranked among the French nobility or was just a colonial bauble, I don't know.
Yes.
But the graves can still be seen of two princes of Château.
Oh, really? Oh, interesting. Yes, thank you. Another place to go and visit. Yes, thank you.
Thank you
so much, Helen. I had a small question about the. Do you think is it possible, because we sort of compare the British imperial experience in India and the British imperial attitudes to India with imperialism in the New World. There's a lot of difference between what the Spanish and the Portuguese did in the New World. So there is linguistic and religious conversion there. There's physical destruction and so on and so forth. And there is certainly nothing like the British production of a lot of knowledge, Orientalist knowledge about Indian customs and so on and so forth. So I'm wondering, do you have any statistics for the for the number of such awards given by the Portuguese in Brazil or the Spanish in Mexico to the native population? How would how would the sort of as a tool of ensuring and obtaining loyalty. Of the local population, how does that play out in comparison to what the British do in India, to how the is there any comparison in the imperial dynamics to relationship?
I think I'll know that when I've got further along with the project. But I think, first of all, I mean, Mexico is a very strange case because you have two very short-lived empires, or if we can even call them empires, but two very short-lived emperors. Brazil is a different case. Statistically, which was your question, I simply don't have numbers. But the whole point of having these orders was again to bind, important native people. Brazil, of course, is very, very complex because they had Portuguese in Brazil, they had Creoles in Brazil, etc., etc., and they were, I think, trying to establish an empire without, I don't think they were really understanding the country. Well, you might say Britain didn't understand the country it was in either, but I think that when the Brazilian monarchy fled from Napoleon and came to Brazil in 1808, I certainly don't think they understood the country they were coming to, and a lot of the country was not accessible to them. There were no roads going out of Rio. The only way to kind of get to somewhere else was to get into a ship and go along the coast and land, because it was simply sort of cut off from the hinterland. So the society in Rio, when they did land, was small. I mean, the actual number of people was small, and something like 60% of the people who were in the city were slaves. They were black slaves. So you had a very, very small elite. But again, that's a very good point, is just to compare how large or how small was the elite that you were trying to rule the country with, because it's always one of the things that's commented on with regard to India, that actually there were very few British in India compared to the 300 or 400 million, Indians, and then you had this very small number of British people. But those are all points for me to ponder on. Yes, look here.
Could you point out which part, because it's looking a little vague to me.
Oh, it's very vague. I can get you another one right down there. I think I've got it.
A sharper image.
Yes. Let me go way down here to the end of this, because there were stamps. One of the ways where people knew what she looked like. Let me just go right down here. Here you are. Now you've got one postage stamp which looks like she really looked like, and look at the other two, and the profile on the coin. I mean, if she's ruling over India for all those decades, this is what people thought she looked like. The top two stamps and the coin, and it's supposed to be making her look, I think, more acceptable to the Indians, because see, this little woman with that pointy nose and the double chin, as you can see on the bottom stamp. I mean, that's much more what she looked like. And the portrait of her on the hanging from the star, from the collar, the star, the portrait for the people who got the order of the Star of India, was like that coin, with that sort of profile. I mean, it bears no resemblance to the woman. It is a portrait of a queen, but it's not a portrait of Queen Victoria in any realistic sense. Yeah.
What was the hair, do you think, planted in this?
Well, I think it was a slight fashion at the time. Where's our colleague who knows all about Germany? It's actually quite a kind of a German style. And of course, she had a German husband, you know. June.
Portrait of Albert and
Yeah, Victoria.
Windsor Palace. She has this, and she was also they were very fond of medieval culture.
Exactly. The Eglinton tournament and all that stuff. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. So that's what she has on this, and it's much more like a Grecian, what we would call a Grecian knot in the other ones. And then the typical appearance of her in her old age, which we know from, you know, photographs and all sorts of things, is really that bottom stamp. Yeah, that's what she really did.
We have at the Victoria Memorial, the statue,
Yeah.
standing. She looks so beautiful and so graceful, so different from young and so beautiful compared to, unfortunately,
Yes, that's what she. Yeah, exactly. That's what she. No, and especially not one who's hiding on an island, you know, off the South English coast, who isn't even accessible to the Parliament. I mean, that's when a certain feeling of a sort of republicanism grew up in Britain, because they said, what do we need a queen for? She's never here anyway, and she doesn't even open Parliament. She's just not there. So she's hiding down in Osborne on the Isle of Wight mourning, and then she has her Durbar Hall built there, and she has her munshi, and she's learning Hindustani, you know, at a later stage of her life. I mean, she was incredibly interested in India. And she kept, you know, badgering prime ministers and things that they weren't doing things right, and sort of trying to interfere. And people said, well, this is way beyond her constitutional right. She shouldn't be doing this. But nonetheless, she felt very strongly, actually, about India. But she was using the princes as exotic objects. If they, from a top Calcutta tailor, which they sometimes did, had themselves made a suit of European clothes because they were going to Europe and they were very highly educated and they had possibly studied at the Inns of Court in London and everything, and they appeared, Victoria heard they were going to be coming, you know, in a frock coat with a top hat. Oh, no. They had to go away, find Indian clothes somewhere and put them on. And they hadn't always brought them with them even, because they thought, well, when I'm in Britain, I'm going to be a British gentleman. Not for Victoria. No. She wanted them to be exotic, decorative figures at her court, which again is a terrible inferiorization of people. You know, it's all right if you're here, but you have to look decorative. Sorry. Republican spirit rising up there again. Yes, sorry. And there was huge mourning when she died. I mean, she had never been to India. People had never seen her. But 1901, I mean, this was a whole huge event. Yeah, yes, as a sort of, as a kind of mother goddess almost, a mother goddess to India. Yeah. Absolutely, yes.
Mine one is not a question. It is something that the Star of India is not disappeared still from India, because British or Indian Cricket Control Board, their logo is still like that. They have only removed the legend Heaven's Guide. Yeah, it's still there. If you see the Indian cricketers are there, it is the same logo. That's
I'm so glad you told me that. That's marvelous. Thank you.
I think it may be a legacy from Maharaja Bupinder Singh, who is said to have conquered more ladies than he scored first-class runs.
Yes, absolutely. Yes. That's marvelous.
Maharaja Porbandar, who killed more tigers than he scored first-class runs.
Yeah, yes. I mean, I have to say that excuse me, I've got to cough again.
That's not all. There is also the Royal Calcutta Golf Club still in Calcutta, which is still called the RCGC, and the RCTC, the Royal Calcutta Turf Club, So these
But
have all
that's
retained the names
true.
of.
And
the
I think
royalty.
maybe we have the Royal Yacht Club in Ireland too. And in Bombay.
Both.
In Bombay. Yes, in Bombay, the Royal. Yes, I think we do that in Ireland as well. I think it's called the Royal Yacht
And
Club.
they still call it the Royal Bengal Tiger. You see, so
Yes, yes. So these things kind of. But does anybody ever think royal kings? Do it's just the name now? Is
Yeah,
that right?
it's just a name.
It's just a name.
Yeah.
Some names you get to keep. Like we have kept the name Victoria Memorial Hall.
Yes.
And we're
Yes.
still located on Queensway,
Yes.
on which we are the only address.
You're Queensway.
One Queensway
One-
and it stops at one.
At one.
It doesn't
One
go beyond
Queensway.
that. No,
Yes.
there is no do number in Queensway. You see, there's only number one.
This is all
Right.
notwithstanding the fact that Harrington Street is now Ho Chi Minh Circle.
Yes, what you meant. Yes, you were telling.
But we are on
Yes.
Queensway.
That's true.
Yes.
Fascinating, of course. Thank you very much for this wonderful
well-
lecture. So please join me in applauding Helen for this wonderful talk. And thank you all for the supplementary information, especially
Yes.
this one about the cricket board is actually true.
and the
that the
costumes
BCII
and
has
the-
still maintained this
Yes.
Star of India thing over there.
My husband and I behaved correctly today because we went and watched
Yeah.
some cricket.
Because the moment they remove it, they think that's not cricket. Yeah? So, right.
It's not cricket.
Right. So the discussion can continue over tea outside. Thank you very much for coming and joining
And
us for this
thank you for
afternoon's
coming and
lecture.
for listening.
Right.
Listening patiently. Thank you.